Welcome to UO Today. I'm Paul Pepis, Director of the Oregon Humanities Center. My guest today is Anshuman Razdan, or AR, Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Oregon. Prior to his UO appointment, AR served as the Associate Vice President for Research Development at the University of Delaware from 2016 to 2022. Before serving at the University of Delaware, AR had a 20-year career at Arizona State University, where he was a professor of computing, informatics, and decision systems engineering, and held a number of key administrative posts. Thanks so much, AR, for coming on the show. It's great to have you with us.
Thank you for inviting me. Happy to be here.
So first, tell us a little bit about your background. Where are you from?
Oh, where I'm from?
You know, any aspect of your background you want to share?
Sure. So I was born and raised in India, in northern part of India, about 100 miles west of New Delhi. Like a typical immigrant graduate story, I came at 21 after my bachelor's of engineering to do my master's, and then I had a transition from my undergraduate training from a mechanical engineer to computer science as I got interested in computer graphics and 3D computer geometry. Those were things that were taking off in the late 80s, and I became a computer scientist. But an important aspect of my upbringing, I would say, has been shaped by my father, who was also a faculty in an ag university in India. So I literally grew up on the campus because there was housing there. Another aspect of that is that he was a animal husbandry person, and so he would hold camps in villages, some during my summer break, to work with farmers and to help make the breeds better. And so I accompanied him, and I spent a lot of time because it was fun to go with Dad. But I think that's where the seeds of social and economic impact were driven home when you see a farmer really be happy and and its economic conditions improve. So I think that I didn't realize it then, but that's has a great amount of impact in me staying in academia and doing what I do today. Has been a long arc, but I think the seeds were sown then.
So let's go back and talk a little bit about your own work, your own research. So give us a sense of the work you've done with spatial modeling. It's really interesting.
That's also an interesting story. So my specific work is in 3D geometry and what we call as splines, and the mathematics behind it. And during my PhD, I started to work with the professor of sculpture, and this is early to mid 90s. 3D-dimensional scanners, laser scanners were just very expensive or were beginning to be available, and they produced a lot of data, triangle meshes, and he was looking for a counterpart to help him with the technology. And he looked at it from an art and sculpture perspective as digital, and I looked at that from a technology perspective as a computer scientist involved in geometry. And I think that was also an important lesson that shaped my career is, as a computer scientist, how do you make horizontal connections with other disciplines while you raise each of those disciplines vertically? And there the seeds of interdisciplinary collaboration were born in an unlikely manner of a professor of sculpture talking to a computer scientist in those days. And so then I stayed at Arizona State University, and we formed a new center called PRISM, Partnership for Research in Spatial Modeling. And an interesting sort of ironic twist of that story is that sometime in the mid-90s, late mid-90s, there was a call from NSF, from Computer Science Directorate, asking for interdisciplinary proposals. And so we submitted significant proposal that involved computer science and digital sculpture and physical anthropology. And it was not funded. With the reviewers' remarks were, when we said interdisciplinary, we meant hardware people talking to database people. We didn't mean this interdisciplinary. So in a way, it was a mixture of laughter and tears. But then that subsequently led to some other successes later on with the same premise, as we have all woken up to the impact of interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary interactions that can really make these advances besides the narrow traditional way of looking at just advancing your field only.
So one of the stories that you've told that I found particularly interesting is your work collaborating with a team at Mount Vernon to reconstruct George Washington's face at different stages of his life. So tell us about that project.
Thanks for asking. So that was a very interesting project. So in early 2000s, Mount Vernon was looking to celebrate 250th anniversary of George Washington becoming a British officer. And they were thinking about different areas, and I believe the Ford Foundation was going to also build a new segment or a new building for them. And so they were trying to think of doing something beyond the usual and putting artifacts out. So they approached a colleague, a physical anthropologist from University of Pittsburgh, who by the time sort of this cross-disciplinary work, an openness to work with other disciplines must have reached him. And so he approached me and the professor of sculpture, Dan Collins, at Arizona State, to see if we would collaborate with him. And so that's how it came about. And the sort of the plan was, how do we take the image, loosely speaking, of George Washington, which over a period of time, if you research this, most of the paintings about George Washington were done by artists after his death. So there is very few portraits done. So the idea was how to discover the real George Washington. And they wanted to then do it in 3 dimension. And our source of information, since we can't exhume the body and scan actual stuff, was a bust by Houdin, a French sculptor who had come to Mount Vernon when he was 53. So just for our audience, so at 19, George entered the British, as an officer in the British Army. At 45 is the famous crossing of the Delaware. And then he went back to Mount Vernon thinking he was retired. And at 53, this Houdin bust was done. And at 57, he took oath as the president. So that's key important timeline. And so, and the way Houdin had done the bust was to take, in those times they called it the death mask, although this was a live mask, and then use that to create his sculpture. And so that was the best thing we had access to, and the bust had not been brought out of its case in several decades, I think 40 or 50 years. So that was a harrowing experience to be having these 3D scanners so close, and I had to sign all sorts of insurance and waivers and stuff. So that was that, and then there is a sculpture that Houdin did of Washington, which stands in the rotunda of the Capitol Capitol of Virginia in Richmond. So we did full body scans, and and looked at various things. So we had a good, accurate portrait of George at 53. So then the goal was, how do you make a George of 21, 45, and 57? Now there's an interesting part of George Washington's life. And in those days, because of poor dental health, oral health, and no antiseptics and all those things being available, people lost teeth regularly. And by 53, George had only one tooth left. Again, a side ironic story how things become fables. So George was always commented by his peers as the person who listened carefully, didn't speak much, and when he would speak at the end of a meeting, for example, it'd be very profound, and everybody would, it'd be like the final conclusion and summary, and his respect rose as a result of that. Very few people realized that he didn't speak much because he was constantly in oral pain, right? And he had some dentures made and stuff like that. So we scanned that. We scanned the live mask. And then the hard work really started, which was to de-age him. And when you lose teeth, not from an accident, but over a gradual period of time, there is collapse of the oral cavity. So we had to work that backwards. And then we got skeletal remains of a soldier who was about 6'4", 220 pounds. We were able to scan his upper and lower jaw and then try to fit the geometry and modify what we scanned from George's sculpture, which was the outer skin, and how that would fit. And then basically reworked as George with a complete set of teeth at 21. And then at 45, crossing the Delaware, and then at 57, taking oath. The 3 statues of George stand in the Ford Museum at Mount Vernon today, and that's the story of George in 3D recreated.
It's also a great story of the interest of interdisciplinary research.
Absolutely. So couldn't have done without my colleagues in anthropology, but also with artists, right? One of the things I'm told is artists don't like to paint hands. And so getting the hands the right size and the rest of the body, there was some artistic influence in that. And so and also in terms of posture, sitting on a horse, which is the 45-year-old George Washington. Yeah, couldn't have done that. It was fantastic because, the best part of this, I have to say, is if there are 3 disciplines working, I'm the 1/3 part of it, and 2/3 parts of it, I'm a student of what other 2 disciplines are doing. And to me, that's fascinating. To me, that's a way of saying that I can learn about those 2 disciplines without having to take ever an exam and worry about my grade point average, which I would have flunked as an art student, But now, actually, that some of those things resulted in a joint class that I and Dan Collins offered on visualization, and it was bringing technology and art together. It was a senior and graduate level class that it came about. So
fascinating. So you left the University of Arizona and
Arizona
State. Sorry. And you went to the University of Delaware. So share with us one of your major accomplishments, what you're most proud of from being at University of Delaware.
One of the things that very publicly I can talk about, which is in public forum, is the Data Science Institute. So that was a very interesting also genesis to that. When I got there in 2016, there was a call from NSF to create these data science centers for research. And we had a classical element of math and statistics and computer science and electrical engineering, all I was trying to bring them together from a team formation, and no senior faculty would really volunteer, and it fell on junior faculty to do this. And voila, surprise, we had a massive failure. But from that failure, from the ashes rose the phoenix, and understanding that if we have to do this, we have to do this in a really systematic way, which led to us organizing a thematic workshop across the university, across all disciplines. We generated a white paper that really laid out the path for cluster hiring and actually building a new data science institute. So just the whole process, and maybe that's the theme of my life, is first there is a failure which leads to success, which is not different than a lot of serial entrepreneurs, in fact, right? And so that has been very successful. That's one public kind of a success story that I can share.
So what attracted you to the University of Oregon?
Potential of impact. So one of the things, like I shared with you, the seeds were sown. At Arizona State, as the university has grown bigger and bigger, it sort of became evident to me that if I wanted to really have an impact, I wanted to go to a somewhat smaller university that over a period of time I actually get to know faculty on one-on-one basis and develop a rapport. And that's how I thought, and I think that is most impactful, is getting to know the soul of the university. And so those 6 years were, full of a lot of different successes. So when I was approached for the University of Oregon, I looked long and hard. And to me, it seemed like really good bones, a lot of potential, and perhaps I could bring some organizational leadership skills to help the university move forward. I never really wanted to go to an institution where if everything was a well-oiled machine, that I would just be spending my time at the desk approving stuff. I want to be doing stuff and making a difference. And I think University of Oregon, I think, provides that sandbox, so that was really attractive. And I must say, I discovered through my interview process that nature has been extremely kind to the state of Oregon, and it's not a bad place to live. Love Eugene, love what Oregon has to offer besides the university aspect of it. So,
what have you learned about research at U of O? What's the one or two things that have surprised you or interested you about the research that's done here?
So I have to say that I've always been at institutions with very strong engineering colleges. What is different about UO is its legacy in natural sciences, life sciences and physics, chemistry, but also I think immense amount of scholarship in arts and humanities. Eugene is sort of like a Santa Fe of the Northwest. It's a place where those things have flourished, and so it's a slightly different set of elements. And then at the same time, the night campus and the trajectory that is taking, and looking at it from what are the cross-disciplinary interactions. I call them collisions in a positive way. What collisions can we create so that collectively we can advance forward. So learning more about things like Institute of Neuroscience or molecular biology and a 60-year legacy, and having a marine biology center on the coast. So those are, kind of interesting new things. One thing I say is that in my job as administrator of a research enterprise, 80% of the things are same from university to university, essentially in terms of the processes. Two things that are significantly different are how the local legislature and local government supports the university or that interaction. And the second part is the community, which at large, what I mean by that is starting from industry, university interaction, the local strengths, the art community, the humanities community, and those kind of interaction. Those relationships, you can't take it from one place to another, so you have to start building them from scratch and learning about them scratch. So that's part of being my effort to kind of immerse myself in that.
So what's your view on the role of the humanities and the humanistic social sciences in the research enterprise of an R1 public university?
Well, I'll take even a step back, and I may not be even correctly paraphrasing Richard Florida, but the artists and the humanities are the soul of the society, and without that, we might as well have an army of robots. As an engineer, that's great, but I think that you miss the whole fundamental part of what makes us a human. So number one, that element, whether it is music, any form of art in the humanities, if it's not vibrant, if it's not part of the fabric, if it's not part of the culture, then I don't think society as a whole of that city, of that community, has any, from a long-term survival perspective, the chances are dim. So starting from that basis, the integration and that convergence and collisions are important. Secondly, with my own experience of working with archaeologists, anthropologists, and artists, I think we can find a lot of common ground between the sciences and the arts and the humanities. We have examples of, digital arts, digital humanities. So if you think about data science, that touches all aspects of it. In fact, the artists and probably digital humanists probably push the technologists to something that was never imagined by the technologists, right? So that's important push and pull that is there. You talked about the research. So in my own experience, we won many multi-million-dollar grants involving, there was a debate when we hit our first $2.5 million grant. As I told you, the first one got rejected. There was a big debate about whether to put the professor of sculpture as a co-PI on an NSF grant. I'm talking about 1997, right? And I said, why not? And, and so I think it's the approach, the attitude, and the aptitude that you approach these things, I think make it much more inclusive. Whether we are producing the next generation of workforce, first of all, it needs to be, you just don't create an engineer or a scientist, they need to be well-rounded, right? So there is right there, you are making an impact on this next generation that is very important for our survival, right? So, and then I think there is there is room for NEH, NEA type of opportunities, but I think the bigger opportunities come from the from intersection of the disciplines. So I'm very enthused. In fact, your institute is part of that vibrant fabric of my office as one of the institutes, and I think there's a lot of potential we can work on together.
Great. So a couple of goals you have for this academic year.
I pause because there are so many juggling acts
Yes.
one has to do. I think first is understanding, listening. I do a lot of coffee and learns with a lot of faculty, getting essence of what faculty want to do, what our strengths are. You can't accentuate, you can't support that until and unless you really learn about that thing. So that's one very significant goal. And then it is sort of a next logical step in that is to figure out how can I help. The research office is a service organization, and we are the scaffolding. You as a faculty are the person of ideation. You are the expert in your own discipline. I can't create those ideas, but I sure can be your scaffolding. I can supply you the bricks as you build the building. Use that metaphor. So we are a service-oriented organization. We want to improve our services to our faculty. Specifically, we used to do these seed grants in humanities. They were, I think, $7,000. I don't know if it's come out yet, but shortly, if it hasn't, we're increasing that to $10,000. And I want to also, that extra $3,000 is an incentive for faculty to engage a student or for travel or for other things, because I want to also make sure that the students are getting included in these seed grants. So that's one simple example of how I want to make sure that these great ideas that you all have get that support, and because you got to nurture the seeds before they become saplings, before they become, big corn stalks. So
So I've just got about a minute left.
Yes.
Final question. Share with us an interesting or enjoyable experience you've had since coming to Oregon.
I would say two parts to it. One, the collegiality and people. Couldn't ask for a better welcoming environment. A lot of patience, a lot of love and welcome that I and my wife feel, part of being the community. And then second, I mentioned last month or so we went to Waldo Lake, and just the pristine water, and again going back to nature being kind to Oregon, totally blown away. So Oregon has so much to offer to add to the reservoir of our, to help drive what we do day to day. So both of those things.
Well, thank you, AR, for taking the time to speak with us today out of your very busy schedule. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
I've been speaking with Anshuman Razdan, or AR, the Vice President for Research and Innovation at the University of Oregon. Thanks so much for watching.